So I'm going to pin all of the people. So we'll start with you, Catherine, and then you can do your bit, and then I'll introduce everyone else. So I'd like to introduce Catherine Conway from Go Unpackaged. Catherine Conway has spanned, she's spun both the private and third sectors, but always focusing on the interplay of how business interacts to support the society which operates. She's worked in corporate social responsibility for nearly 20 years, and even before the concepts of zero waste and circular economy, she could see that there was a problem with the amount of plastic packaging being used in our modern lives. She's a true innovator, and she first set up the Unpackaged as the first modern zero waste shop in 2006. So her passion straddles the corporate world, getting reuse projects up and running in the world, as well as collaborating across sectors to shape policy needed for a reuse economy to thrive. Catherine is on the Circular Economy Task Force that the government has set up as well. So we're really pleased that Catherine can join us. So this is a really kind of key moment of kind of reuse, and Catherine's going to talk to us and share with us, how we can kind of get there with the reuse and refill agenda. So over to you, Catherine.
I'll do my best. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. All right, lovely. So did it just move? Just to check, because I can't see it on your...
Yeah, I can see it.
All right, I'll holler if anything goes wrong with the tech, just let me know. So lovely to see you all. I'm sorry I can't be there in person. I guess just to go back, as Greg said, so I set up the first version of Unpackaged back in 2006 because I guess I was in my 20s. I was living in London. I used to go to my local health food shop to refill Ecova products. And I just remember coming back with all of this packaging in my hands thinking, why isn't there a shop where everything is refillable? So back in those days, you could get grants for things, and there used to be a really brilliant organization called Unlimited, and they provided what was called a level 1 award, which was £5,000 for people who had interesting ideas of things to do within their communities. So I secured one of those, and a friend of mine used to work for Social Enterprise London, and he said, oh, when anyone has a good idea, we always tell them to go and run a market stall. So the first Unpackaged market stall, just looking back on it, it was so basic, but it was also just everything it needed to be. So we just had this huge message from the start, which was about bringing your own containers. So from 2006 to 2013, I had a market stall, then I had a small shop, then I had a larger shop. And I genuinely thought I was going to change the world with my chain of small independent shops. And I guess then the reality of landlords and bills and everything hit. And so, I'm sure there's lots of zero waste shop owners, either with you in person or on the call today. And I mean, I know how hard it is. So I was doing this during the first financial crisis, and running a small independent business in those days was really, really hard, as well as it is now. So I guess when my second shop, we added on a restaurant that was meant to be a zero waste restaurant, and we didn't execute the restaurant very well. And so it tanked the whole site. So at that point, I had a bit of a rethink. So this is 2013. And I think by that point, there were maybe a couple of the girls in Germany had set up a zero waste store, but there still wasn't that kind of wealth of zero waste stores. There was no community around me. And I think at that point, I realized that, 97% of people in the UK shop in supermarkets. That's where the bulk of the problem is coming from. And I guess that prompted our move into supermarkets. So I started on the left with Planet Organic, who are a lovely chain of organic supermarkets, and definitely the right place to start. We then did the big Waitrose Unpacked project. Branding looks eerily similar to Unpackaged. And over a 11-week project, I think we removed over 100,000 pieces of single-use packaging, which I guess just showed me the value of having to work with supermarkets, which is not traditionally something I ever thought I would do, because I do find the supermarket model challenging on many fronts, not just packaging. But it turns out that we are quite good at working with supermarkets and brands and getting them on board. And that's where we need to see a lot of change. So that's where we really focus our efforts. We do a small amount with the independent sector still. And then we also started thinking about, well, what does reuse look like if it isn't just refilling in store, because we appreciate that that's a certain type of customer that maybe is going to remember their own containers and is happy to dispense in store. Obviously limits the kind of products that you can do. So we designed Abel and Cole's Club Zero project, which were these reusable containers that get sent backwards and forwards with the idea that you're meant to decant them into your own products at home. So we've done lots of, I'd guess, say, individual trials with retailers, but we're always pushing for what's the bigger thing, what's the thing that can drive the most impact, what's the thing that's going to scale. So in 2020, we set up something called the Refill Coalition. And what we actually wanted to do is bring a supply chain view to how reuse and refill could work. So we developed two systems. So one is an in-store refill system. So I've got some photos in a minute, but you can effectively see that this reusable vessel, as we call it, fits into the back of a redesigned hopper. And as anyone who's ever run a zero waste store knows, the cleaning and refilling of those hoppers is so much work. So partly it was to take all of that away from the store staff, whether it be independent stores or mainstream stores, and then speed up the process, because the problem is that retailers won't implement the old-fashioned version of in-store refill. So then whilst we were doing that, we also, we've been a partner, we've had Ocado in our coalition since the start, because they always wanted to design a standardized consumer version of this. So the idea being that it was a sort of mini bulk format. So it's about 3 kilos and it can hold both liquids and dry goods. And it also goes around the supply chain. So we ended up testing these with Aldi. So that's the Aldi Solihull branch. So we did 2 stores with Aldi. So to all intents and purposes, it just looks like a really nice, slick refill in store. But then you've got this super clever system that the customer doesn't see. And the whole point is you have a lovely false front. So this can get knocked around in the supply chain. So we designed it to last at least 60 turns, which is about 5 years in the supply chain. So they're designed for longevity, and that's why the customer doesn't see them. So that's the in-store version. And then the online version for Ocado, which you can buy if you're in London and the Southeast. And hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll be expanding. And we do laundry liquid, fabric conditioner, rice and pasta. And so the whole idea of this coalition, which we were very lucky enough to receive a small amount of funding from Innovate UK to support, was to really start to design systems that retailers and brands can use that are standardized. So all retailers and brands can use the same system, obviously personalizing it to how it works for them. But once you start standardizing, then you can start getting the economies of scale. You have one wash plant that can wash for multiple retailers in the same way that you have a recycling plant, a MRF, that can receive waste from multiple retailers and brands. So that was the last 5 years. It was a hard project to run because we literally started it, then COVID hit, then the war in Ukraine hit, and then all the supply chain problems hit. So it was definitely challenging to keep all of our partners' attention. So we had every major retailer in and out of our coalition over 5 years. And then the launch point was Aldi and Ocado. Unfortunately, Aldi did not continue it beyond their 2 store trial because they couldn't get more internal buy-in because no other retailers had picked it up. And we've got time for Q&A, but it's very interesting to think there is a bias against refill in store amongst UK retailers and brands for various reasons. I don't necessarily agree with it. I think that there are some products that refill in store makes absolute commercial and environmental sense for, and appreciate that a reusable or a returnable product that you could either buy off the shelf or you could have delivered to your door through an online delivery is a much easier system to sell to customers. It fits much more in existing retail patterns, but I feel quite sad that they've written off refill in store quite so much because I think it still has loads of advantages. And Ocado are carrying on with this. So this is a fully functioning reusable system, and there's no deposit on these vessels, which means, appreciate that Ocado is not the most accessible supermarket in terms of price points, but it makes this reusable system accessible in the sense that it doesn't cost more, because you're not asking people to put a 50p or £1 deposit in the way that the old Loop project did. So really proud of this one to keep going. So we do all of these commercial projects, but it's very obvious that we don't have a sort of regulatory environment from the government that supports reuse. Everything is based on single use, and there are no financial incentives or support for businesses that want to drive reuse. And that is problematic. So last year, we set up a project to look at infrastructure. So we have this tool called an end-to-end supply chain modeling tool, and I won't bore you with it today, but effectively what it does is it measures all of the activities in any given supply chain. So you can basically plug in a single-use supply chain, and then you can plug in any form of existing or planned reusable one, and it will tell you the commercial and the environmental benefits of doing it. And what we wanted to do is actually say, everybody talks about 30% reuse. So lots of big NGOs, we all talk about 30% reuse. What does that actually mean? So I think Dan's talking today, or if he hasn't already talked. So Everyday Plastic will have outlined that we put about 90 billion items of single-use packaging on the market per year. 30% reuse on 90 billion is something like 520 million items of reusable packaging a week that we need to sell to customers. They need to use it, they need to give it back to us, and we need to get it round some fictional reusable supply chain where it can be collected, sorted, washed, sent back to brands and manufacturers for refilling every week. And currently we don't have the infrastructure for it, we don't have the funding for it, we don't have the legislation that's going to make it happen, and we don't have a plan of what we're going to do. So genuinely, if we think that this is what we should be doing, we absolutely need to turn our minds to what that transition pathway looks like to get us to at least 30% reuse. I mean, 30% reuse is still 70% single use, which the activist in me weeps over, but 30% reuse is a big number for us to try and get to in a system that's just completely based on single use. So what this looks like is basically we modeled the 30%, which is, I think, something like 867 million cases. So the figures that I'm going to show you are what happens when you do that 30% and you've still got the 70% of the iceberg. But we effectively wanted to create an evidence base that would show what the end-to-end costs of a system like this was going to be, what the new packaging EPR, so extended producer responsibility costs, were going to be. So this is I'm sorry if you've already discussed this today and I wasn't here. So these are the new fees brought in by the government for all producers, which basically takes the cost of local authorities managing packaging waste and puts that cost back on the producer that's selling it. Whether the system has been designed as well as it could have been is up for grabs, but at the minute it's doing what's intended, which is putting a massive financial burden on companies, so they need to find other solutions. So it's actually a financial driver for change. And we obviously want to show how many emissions that reuse could avoid, and we want to show the amount of packaging waste we can avoid, but you've also got to think about that as resources going in the front end. So if you're avoiding X million tons of packaging waste, you're also avoiding those very precious resources being used in the first place. So it's a double-ended one there. So I won't hugely bore you with you. The report is on our website. There's an executive summary, which is a much more readable version of it. There's a huge technical annex that shows all the assumptions that we made. But what was really important was that we wanted to compare some scenarios. So single use is what we all have at the minute. Single use with a deposit return scheme is, we all know that DRS is coming in for bottles and cans in 2027. What I didn't want is for everyone to go, oh, well, hey, we'll just manage everything with single-use DRS, because it does not solve the problem of single-use packaging, because it is still a single-use based system. And we would argue that DRS needs to have reuse in it. It's not going to. So then we modeled 4 really interesting reusable scenarios. So citizen return, so that is people bringing packaging back every week to the front of store in the same way we do film recycling. We did online, so existing online deliveries are coming to people's houses. They've got empty vans going back, so they could be taking reusables back. Then we've got 3PL, so that stands for third-party logistics. So this could be anyone. This could be Amazon, this could be DHL, it could be existing, it could be new, but curbside collection. So people coming to pick up your reusables from your house. And then this is your local authority collection, so putting things out with your recycling. We also did map out the cost of refill in store, and the evidence will show you that the absolute cheapest thing for everybody to do is refill in store, because customers manage their own packaging. They bring their packaging down, they take it away, they wash it themselves, so it doesn't have to go around this sort of enormous system that needs to get set up. So the really important thing that we are trying to show industry is that reuse at scale can deliver economic and environmental benefits. So when I sit in meetings with every big brand and retailer that you can think of, they will all say single-use plastic is really cheap and washing and logistics is really expensive, so we can't do this. What we have shown is they can look at, across this 30%, £136 million savings per year in their EPR costs that are coming in. So that's a 94% reduction in EPR fees. So they are all complaining to government that these fees are coming in. Well, your quickest way to solve that is to switch items in reuse. Really, really interesting. Of those 4 reuse systems, you get between a 12 and a 22% end-to-end system cost saving. Now, that's because the costs are coming out of the production of single-use packaging. And even though there may be some more expense on washing and logistics, it is vastly outweighed by the amount of savings you can make from single-use packaging. There is obviously a single-use packaging industry that will fight tooth and nail to keep their position. But if you want to save money, that's how to do it. Really, really important was to show that those 4 reuse scenarios all show a 95% reduction in emissions and a 95% reduction in packaging materials resources going in, waste coming out. You will not achieve that with a single-use deposit return system scheme. So we really wanted to bring that evidence base in so that the DRS scheme is not expanded for single-use and is instead at some point switched into reuse. And then there's a huge new job economic growth argument. So if we're talking about, UK-wide reuse systems, then there is a huge opportunity for regional washing centres, which is, clean growth, clean jobs. I would much rather have people working in hygienic washing facilities than working in really filthy recycling plants, which is a terrible job to do. So there's a huge kind of growth and societal benefit angle as well. So we produced this research in June. We got some really great industry press on it, where they all picked it up. It was used by the new Reuse Packaging Partnership. So this is all of 9 key retailers who are working together to create a sort of an interoperable pre-fill, so a returnable scheme. So they're not into refill in store, but they want to do returnables. And they use this evidence as part of the reason why they should be doing it. UK Plastics Pact, which is run by our friends at WRAP, they are doing what's called their successor agreement, which is going to turn into the UK Packaging Pact. So it's not just focused on plastic, it will be materials agnostic. And they are looking for their post-2025, so what the next 5 years looks like. And we expect them to have targets around reuse on it. And then, as Greg said, I sit on the Circular Economy Task Force. We have been asked to create England's new circular economy strategy. We are self-divided into groups. So we have transport, textiles, construction, chemicals and plastics, agri-food, and there's another one that I can't quite remember. But within agri-food, I've effectively been driving a reuse strategy that would promote, scaled uptake of reusable packaging. And that's coming out. The draft is coming out for consultation in, I'm going to say Q4 of this year, because I'm not entirely sure what month. But before Christmas, there will be a strategy that includes information about reuse and how the government's going to support industry to grow reuse. So that is a whistle-stop tour of the last 20 years. It'll be 20 years next year since I started this. And yeah, it's definitely been a slog, and looking forward to the kind of Q&As that might come, because I think, the most interesting thing is how we all work and how we all talk and how we all drive this forward together collaboratively. So thank you.
It's absolutely amazing that this is like been 20 years, and that's just dedication that you put on that is absolutely amazing. I kind of hope that I can I think it's this I think it's just your passion, um determination, which I really appreciate, and is incredible really. So we'll have some questions afterwards. But I'm going to get Miriam to So Miriam is Miriam Adcock from Zero Waste Scotland. She's been part of for 15 years now, part of communications. She's worked on campaigns from home composting to low food waste to reusable menstrual products addiction, single-use items in the hospitality industry. She's helped community groups in their quest to reduce waste, giving talks and offering advice. And recently her focus has been on cups, and she's going to talk about that with us today. So, sorry, hang on a sec. No, I've got it all sorted. Great. All right. Thank you for joining us, Miriam, and take it away.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much. Can you see my slides okay?
Yeah.
Perfect. That's great. Thank you. So, yep, I'm Miriam from Zero Waste Scotland. We're a non-departmental public body in Scotland. And I've been asked to talk about specifically what's going on with cups in Scotland. So I'm sure you all know the scary numbers, but yeah, in Scotland, we estimate that there's about 388 million single-use cups used every year, which is about 1 million per day. And it's not just the resources going into that, but the littering, the dealing with the waste, picking up litter, all these sorts of issues that's causing a huge problem. And as such, you may well be aware that the Scottish Government recently did a consultation looking at introducing a charge on single-use cups. We don't know quite exactly when something's going to happen, or if it definitely is going to happen. There's been a lot of mixed response to this. A lot of people think it's about raising money, but actually, this is about trying to move people to reusable cups. And we will deem this successful if actually it raises no money whatsoever, because everybody has moved to reusable cups. So nobody is having to pay this charge. That's what we would like. But what we're doing now is really trying to focus on proving how reusable cup schemes can work and trying to help people get ahead of the game before any legislation is passed. So we started back in 2019 doing some research, and I'll send these slides to Greg. So there's a load of links on here to reports and things if anyone wants to look at them. But we did a really interesting project with an NHS hospital in Scotland, where they looked at various interventions to try and increase reuse. We know that for years cafes have been offering discounts when you bring your own cup, and it's just not working. So what they tried was a combination of things. So they introduced a 10p cost neutral charge for single-use cups. Just if anyone's not sure what that means, I know there's a lot of people saying, oh, you can't add an additional charge on for a single-use cup. People can't afford it. But actually what they did was kind of similar to the carrier bag thing, that added on a charge for a single-use cup rather than the discount. So if you would normally go in and pay £2 for your coffee, what they were saying is the coffee is £1.90, but then you have to pay 10p for the cup. And psychologically, that difference just seems to resonate better with people. They don't want to pay that extra bit, as we've seen with the bags. So they introduced this charge. They also gave all staff a free reusable cup. And if they kept bringing that back, every 10th drink was free. And in this scenario, the reuse went from 1% to 43%, which is absolutely astounding, and saved 157 cups per day, or 60,000 per year. So that was great. We were really buzzing after that, had all these plans for a load of fantastic pilots, and then of course lockdown hit. So that scuppered quite a few things. But in 2021, we kind of started to bring in one of the pilots. We didn't want to go full throttle in case lockdown hit again. So we just did a very small pilot in Portobello, and cups was just a very small part of that. So I won't go into that. I mean, there were some great results, but the numbers were so low. It's not really worth talking about. But we did look at quite a few different things. So things like sauce pots and sachets and stirrers and napkins and all sorts of things. And there was some useful learning in there. So you can have a look at that report if you wish. But then we went for a bigger pilot. We wanted to look at a citywide scheme. So we targeted Stirling because it's quite a sort of compact, nice city that you can walk about quite easily. It's not too big, and there's a limited number of cafes. The way we worked it was we funded a local community group, Transition Stirling, to actually manage it on the ground. And we had about 20 cafes or shops signed up, and you could go and borrow a reusable cup for a £1 deposit, and you could drop it off at any one of the other cafes that are participating. The theory being, if you go and get a takeaway coffee, you're not necessarily going to stand outside that cafe and drink it. You're going to walk down the road, so you don't want to go back to the original cafe. So it's trying to make it as easy as possible for people. Transition Stirling then had to kind of manage the scheme because the danger was that all the cups would end up at the one cafe at the bottom of the hill, and they would be repaying all the deposits and things like that. So there was a lot of kind of data processing and having to move about cups, move about deposits and things, which made it quite challenging. So that was a big challenge. Also, the challenge was that we were paying Transition Stirling. We only had the budget to do it for 6 months. So unfortunately, after 6 months, the pilot stopped. You can see the figures there that about 50% of the cups were returned, which sounds quite poor, but actually a lot of those were still in circulation. It doesn't take account of the fact that a lot of cups, 1,338, were brought back to be swapped for a clean cup or to be refilled. So cups were being used on a regular basis and a lot of occasions. But 6 months isn't really long enough to really prove the model. And a lot of cups would sort of still be out there and would have people wanting to bring them back. And some cafes have continued it. But there were a lot of drawbacks. So the data I mentioned was hard to track, where the cups were, where the money was going. We didn't have QR codes or RFID on the cups. So, it was all very manual. And so, not ideal. Also, one of the issues that came up was that cafes didn't want to be keeping a stash of £1 coins to return deposits. They wanted to do everything digitally, but if they gave the deposit back on a card, they had to pay a charge. So it's like, do you make it cashless? Don't you? That was another issue. We're now into our third kind of pilot where we've given out cups to 11 different organisations across Scotland. And it's a real mixture. We've given them sort of free rein to design their own scheme to see how it works in different scenarios. So we got cafes which have got using the cups in-house for takeaways, for event catering. We've got closed loop scenarios like theatres, scout groups. Some are charging deposits, some don't. We did have a refill shop trying to offer milkshakes in the cups, but actually it failed, but not because of the cups. It was actually the milkshakes didn't take off. And then we've got Paisley Business Improvement District, who are actually trying to do another sort of citywide scheme and have got 10 cafes signed up so far. They've actually given the cups out for free, so there's no deposit, and they're just offering a discount when they're refilled. So we'll see how that goes. But I think the one difference here really is that this is not a 6-month pilot. We've given them the cups. So we want this to be a long-term scheme so we can see how things develop over time. And we're getting them to report every quarter for 18 months so we can really see how it goes. So those are the kind of main things we've been working on. But there's a few other schemes. So at the OVO Hydro, which is a big event space in Glasgow, have been doing a reusable cup scheme for a while. They started off with a deposit scheme, but you can imagine you go to a gig, everybody's coming out at the same time, they all want their deposit back. It's a bit of a logistical nightmare. So actually they've removed the deposit now, which has eased that situation. But then the knock-on effect is that there's no incentive for people to return their cups, so they just leave them on the floor, and the cleaners are having to spend more time picking up cups. So everything you do seems to have a knock-on effect of different sorts. Another scheme that is finished now, but was run by Keep Scotland Beautiful, was in the Highlands, and it was on the North Coast 500 route. So, you know, it's just a huge area across some very remote parts of Scotland. And they were trying to get tourists who are basically traveling around Scotland to have their coffee in one place and then moving on to the next town, dropping their cup off there. So quite a sort of tricky scheme to do. And they basically used Vital's app-based system to try and track it, because, you know, this was going to be a nightmare to see where the cups were. The numbers were fairly low, but it says it's a very remote area, quite a sort of niche sort of offering here, but very interesting. And they found quite a few different findings. Staff training was very important. Promotion and marketing was a challenge here because we haven't got regular customers coming in so much. It's, you know, transient community, it's tourists coming around, so they are not going to get so many opportunities to see marketing. The app was a real challenge. You know, a lot of people don't want to download an app, and Wi-Fi was quite patchy at some of these places. But then the app does have a lot of other benefits, that there was no upfront costs, and it made it a much easier for data collection. So, you know, very different learnings there. And the last one I've wanted to flag is just a big scheme going on at the moment in Glasgow, which is the Borrow Cup scheme, which is run by Hubbub, Reposit, and Keep Scotland Beautiful. So this is going for a really ambitious big project. They've got over 50 locations, from the big chains like Costa down to lots of independent cafes as well. And there's some big numbers here, but still struggling to really get reuse at a decent level. They reckon they're stuck at 2.7% uptake of these, which is better than the kind of 1% we're often hear about reuse, but it's still a long way off what we want. There has been a lot of branding, a lot of push of this. There's even been TV adverts and things like that. But they have found one of the biggest struggles is just getting the staff to say those 8 words, "Would you like that in a Borrow cup?" Because, you know, it's like when you go into a coffee shop now, there's so many questions. What size do you want? What flavor do you want? Do you want this? Do you want that? So it's one more question to ask, and they're finding that quite challenging. So again, staff training and buy-in is really, really key to this. The project is still ongoing, but they are desperately seeking more funding to help it keep going, and they are due to publish their 9-month report in November. So there'll be some really interesting reading from that, hopefully. But that's me, really. Sorry, very quick whistle-stop tour there. I'll stop sharing. As I say, I'll send the slides to Greg in case anybody wants to have a look at those. But thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. And I think you know, I think this gathering is going to be a yearly event. So I think we want to continue this conversation, and we want to hear let's come back next year and continue the discussion and see what progress we've made. So yeah, really excited to kind of pick things up and see how things go. So thanks so much for that. And thank you. Finally, I know we have been talking about refill reuse, but one of the best refill projects that I've seen is through City to Sea, who ran the refill scheme, and I'm just really happy and delighted that Natalie Fee is the founder of City to Sea, is going to join us now for a kind of a wrap-up of the last 10 years and what's actually happened, what the impact that City to Sea have done. This talk is going to focus on multiple things, not just reuse, but this is just a way of sort of saying thank you and like look what has an incredible impact that City to Sea has achieved over the last 10 years, including refill. So over to you, Natalie.
Thanks, Greg. And hi, everyone. I'm just going to check that you can hear me okay?
Yeah,
Great. And you can see my slides?
yeah.
Right, we're rocking. Oh, well, good afternoon, everybody, everyone who's joining online, and all of you that are there in Birmingham today. I hope you've had a really lovely day so far and learnt lots. And yeah, sorry I can't be there in person today, but as I'm sure you would have heard by now, we announced on Monday that City to Sea would be closing after 10 years of working in the space and 10 years of campaigning and making a dent, I think, a small dent in the amount of single-use plastic that we use, particularly here in the UK. So I thought it would be appropriate to join and slightly hijack the reuse session and just give a little thank you really to our community and everyone that supported us. So I'll just kind of do a little overview really of some of the campaigns and some of the things that we've achieved, hopefully to give you a sense of, you know, what we can achieve and what is still possible, because we'll be handing the baton over to all of you amazing, passionate supporters and campaigners and organizations now. So let's have a look if this is working. So I think, like many of you 10 years ago, apart from perhaps Kath, who was there 10 years before all of us, and thanks Miriam and Kath, by the way, I managed to catch your presentations, was the albatross moment for me back in 2013 when I came across the plight of the albatross and Chris Jordan's incredible work in the Midway Islands that made me realise that I needed to do something about plastic pollution. And I was working in TV at the time when I came across those awful scenes that so many of us saw and were moved to act. And that was it for me, really. I think this quote for me has always summed up that behavior change angle. We change our behavior when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of changing. Consequences give us the pain that motivates us to change. So at City to Sea, we've always talked about like different ways of motivating change in behavior, from changing legislation to changing individual behavior. And obviously you've got like the carrot and the stick. And for me and for a lot of people, seeing the albatross and seeing that the devastation that plastic was wreaking on our planet was the stick. That was the thing that caused many of us to feel that pain, that motivated us to take action. So about 11 years ago now, when I started out with City to Sea, I didn't really know where to begin because I was working in TV, as I said at the time. I hadn't done campaigning before. And I like writing music, and I'd written a song and I thought, well, do you know what? I could do a music video about plastic pollution and it'll go viral and everyone will stop drinking Coca-Cola and throwing their plastic bottles on the floor and we'll change the world. Which was, you know, very optimistic. And why not? You've got to start somewhere. So I ran a crowdfunder. But as those of you might know who've run a crowdfunder, it's incredibly hard and exhausting. And then I put this song out into the world. And I think it raised about £17.50 for Surfers Against Sewage. So just to give you a sense of, I think I'd raised about £5,000 to do this project, and then actually only ended up raising about £17 for Surfers Against Sewage. So I felt like I'd failed really at that point, and I thought, well, what more can I do? Because the plastic problem was getting worse. And that's when I decided to start City to Sea, when I saw one morning in Bristol islands of plastic floating down the Severn. It wasn't the Severn, actually, it was the Avon, heading into the Severn. And I thought, well, this problem isn't just happening in Midway Islands, it's happening here in my hometown of Bristol. So we started City to Sea, and as some of you will know, I'm sure you signed the petitions. We started off with two things, really. We started off with refill and we started off with cotton buds, because we felt like they were the things that we wanted to tackle: plastic from bottled water and plastic that was being flushed down our sewers. Whilst we were waiting for water companies to sort out the sewage overflows. So we would be gathering up the most incredible mountains of plastic cotton bud sticks. And then in 2016, we ran our campaign, Switch the Stick, and we managed to get all 9 major supermarkets to stop making cotton buds out of plastic. About 4 years later, the legislation came in, but I think that gave us a taste in the early days of just how consumer pressure can work in terms of supermarkets. And so that was our first sort of big campaign win through a petition-based platform, which was really exciting. And at the same time, we went on from talking about cotton buds to looking at other hidden plastics that were being flushed down the toilet. So we did a campaign called called Plastic Free Periods, which actually did have a lot of viral content and videos back in the day. And we were talking about reusable menstrual products, which back in 2016, still people maybe had just about heard of a moon cup, but there certainly weren't as many products on the market as there are now when it comes to reuse and periods. So that was a really exciting time to be part of the narrative around more eco-friendly period options. And that went on to also become an education campaign called Rethink Periods, that we've reached hundreds of thousands of students. We've trained hundreds and hundreds of teachers and nurses that continue to deliver an unbiased, environmentally educational program around our periods. And we're thinking that this is going to carry on either being delivered through Sustainable Hive or through the Women's Environmental Network. So some of this legacy work will continue, and we'll have more news on other projects over the coming weeks. Cut the Cutlery was a particular favourite of mine, a bit more of a recent campaign where we persuaded Westminster to ban single-use plastic cutlery, plates, polystyrene takeaway items, and that was a huge win. We were using something ridiculous like 11 billion pieces of throwaway lunch items a year just in the UK, and like 4 billion pieces of cutlery. From this campaign, we went on to get 50,000 people to then fill out the DEFRA consultation. So they opened a DEFRA consultation. We basically crashed the consultation by having so many people go in and fill out the form, working with 38 Degrees. So that was I think that was in 2023 that we managed to get that banned. So we were trying to sort of work on plastics from both angles, really, from the legislative angle of trying to bring about the change, and from the grassroots community angle. And many of you will have heard or perhaps even been involved with Refill. You might have run a Refill community in your part of the world. And we started out with that in 2015 and started just with stickers and posters inviting people to come in and fill up their bottle for free. And quite quickly we thought, well, hang on, this should maybe be an app. So we developed the Refill app, which today has had over 750,000 downloads, so yeah, 750,000 downloads. We have around 14,000 monthly users. There's over 300,000 places you can refill your water bottle. I think we've got about 45,000 zero waste shops registered on there. So that's been a lovely way that we've helped people live with less plastic. So sort of from that grassroots community perspective. And of course, sorry, I just couldn't find the slide I wanted to share with you about our reusable cup scheme, but our refill return cup. We've had a few really good pilots with our refill return cup. It wasn't so successful in Bristol because for various reasons, some of the cafes we tried it in, there was like one particularly successful cafe, but Bath Spa University had a brilliant run with it. They're still going with our refill return cup. I think we've had about a 97% return rate there on our cups. And Cardiff City Centre, the Cardiff Bid, ran a brilliant pilot scheme there. We had incredible engagement and really, really high return rates. But I think with all of these, it's really like the funding thing of like, well, who pays for it and how do we carry on with it? And certainly for us at City to See, we were unable to fund it and unable to find the kind of funding that's needed to unlock reuse at scale. You'll no doubt have been involved with World Refill Day. I'm sure that will continue, because the thing is, when you start a World Day, we started with National Refill Day in 2019, and we've been running since then, World Refill Day since then. And this year, I think, was the first year that we really saw it just flying on its own. Like, it will happen every June the 16th with or without us now. So that's a lovely legacy to see just how we celebrate and champion the changes that are happening around the world, and we're able to shine a lens on some incredible programs and successes globally, and not just sort of in the UK. So keep on refilling on World Refill Day. And the Reuse Manifesto was another way that we were really trying to change legislation and push for legislation when it comes to reuse. And we also had our Global Reuse Summit for the last, well, we've had 2 of those. And this year, it was a really brilliant event. Some of you were there, and we we're really able to kind of hone in on what really is needed to shift the dial on reuse. And we talked about things like when EPR comes in, sort of ring fencing a percentage of EPR fees for reuse like they have done in France. So there were some very clear sort of tangible actions that we think are very clear now for government what we're asking and what is needed. We've also been involved in some bigger projects like pre-fill projects with some of the bigger supermarkets like Marks and Spencer's through our UKRI and Innovate UK. And I think we are going to see the change. I'm just sorry that City to Sea won't be around in its current form to see it, but I think, you know, we've played our part. And there are many really exciting players in the space that are hopefully going to keep taking this forward. So I'm sure it'll happen. And I heard someone say the other day, who knows, that they reckon 2027 is going to be the year for reuse to really kind of take hold. So so hang in there, keep the faith and keep your amazing projects going. The future is circular, we're sure of it. And I love this little quote. It's given me much hope and it's helped me keep going, I think, over the last few years. And it's a lovely quote from Clarissa Pinkola Estes. And she says, ours is not the task of fixing the entire world all at once, but of stretching out to mend the part of the world that's within our reach. Ours is not the task of fixing the entire world all at once, but of stretching out to mend the part of the world that's within our reach. So I'm going to leave you with that message, really, just being aware of what part of the world is within your reach, supporting each other, looking out for each other as much as possible. And from me, and certainly from the team without whom none of this would have been possible, we wanted to say a huge thank you to everybody in the plastic-free community, less plastic community, reuse community for all of the support, all of the petition signatures, all of the collaborations that we've had the pleasure of working with you over the last 10 years. So keep up the good fight. We'll be here. We'll have some news in a couple of weeks of what's happening to Refill and the app and things like that. So we're hoping that there will be some legacy for that. So we're talking to a number of partners at the moment. So keep an eye on our LinkedIn channels and our Instagram. Obviously, you can keep in touch with me. I'm also an author, as you may know. My books are out there in the world. If you want to know what we did at City to Sea and how we did it and how we got funding and why we chose a CIC instead of a CIO and then why we set up the CIO and campaign funding ideas, this is the book where I kind of talk about my 10 years at City to Sea and how we did it. So if you're curious or you think that would make a good gift for someone, then it's there on from all good bookshops and all not so good bookshops. And I thought I'd share with you the news that after 10 years and starting City to Sea with the song and going out with the song, an album, in fact, I am going to be going back to doing some music after 10 years of doing my bit for the oceans and for the earth, and I'll be singing my nature-inspired songs, maybe in a town near you, but certainly on a streaming platform near you. My album, Daughter of Nature, comes out next spring on the equinox, but it's on all of the streaming platforms. If you want to take a screenshot of the QR code or get your phones out and zap the QR code, there'll be links to ways to keep in touch. And thanks very much. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
So much. It's just that was just really incredible and like absolutely incredible what City to Sea achieved, and all from the whole music video and look what's happened as a result of that. So it's an incredible journey, and I'm sure the legacy will definitely continue. So we're going to have about 10 minutes of questions if anyone would like to ask any questions to any of these people. Awesome. En route.
Hello, it's Charlie from Brunel. I had a quick question for Catherine that obviously anyone else feel free to answer as well. In your presentation, Catherine, you mentioned that actually retailers are wanting to focus more on returnable packaging. Correct me if I'm mistaken that. But my understanding is that return from home systems are seen as the most environmentally friendly and most feasible due to the convenience, particularly leveraging or basing it off of recyclable systems currently. I'm just wondering what the barriers to implementing current return from home systems might be, because it seems like there's little development in that space currently.
Yeah, I think so. Our research showed that of those 4 reuse systems, the most affordable is the online return from home. Then the next 2 are the curbside collection, either being picked up by third-party logistics or local authorities. I think everyone would agree that they are the most convenient because people are at home. Anything that involves local authorities is deeply, deeply complicated and difficult because local authorities do not have the resources or knowledge or skills to drive reuse, and a different commercial imperative than, for example, a startup that wanted to set up a company doing curbside collection or an existing logistics company that saw a gap in the market. So I think you've got kind of pros and cons of each of the home-based systems. I think the reason that more trials have happened, so if you say you don't think a lot of people are working on this, I think the cost of entry is so big. That's the thing. So back in the day when I was setting up Unpackaged, I spent about a year trying to think, would this be a delivery service or would it be a shop-based, a bricks and mortar solution? And I just had no physical way of testing the delivery system because it was so expensive to do so. And even within the kind of zero waste world, you'll find that everyone like Top Up Truck and everyone that's tried to do the delivery systems to home, it's so expensive. I mean, Ocado, I'm not sure they've even ever made a profit after however many years, of investment after investment. So I think the cost to entry is so big for anything involving home, but the evidence stacks up that it is cheaper. The one that really doesn't work is returning to store. So citizens returning to store. So if you talk to any of the big retailers, they will say to you, if you want us to take back 30% of packaging, we need 30% more floor space. And if you think of how many city centre convenience stores and things there just simply isn't that kind of space. And then you suddenly have lost sales space and things internally. So the cost probably would be higher than what we've even been able to model. So yeah, so I agree that I think the return from home model is possibly the best long-term solution. We've got to work out how we get there, what the transition is, how to fund that transition, and then how to do the right small scale trials to start testing out how it would work and whether it would work best through local authority collections or the private sector doing it. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yes. Also, I just want to say to Natalie, I'm so sorry to see CTTC come to a place.
Thank you for that question. Thank you for the answer, Catherine. Any other questions in the room? Thank you. A question for Catherine. First of all, statement, extended producer responsibility is the consumer that pays ultimately. So I'm really struggling to understand why the retailers are so resistant to refill. Give a bit of background. In the late 80s, early 90s, I was with a research group. We produced a range of products that we use for room care in hotels and for kitchen hygiene products. These were super concentrates that are diluted with water into a treatment spray. Today, when I was going down to reception, those products are still being used. So they're refilled into a trigger spray. That trigger spray is used probably over 100 times. We designed it 50 times and found it's being used over 100 times. You can only put the right products in the right trigger spray. There's a lockout system for that. why are the retailers so resistant to this? Because I don't think that it's a lot more room than the current sort of shelf space that they're using.
So I don't think they're resistant to concentrates and that sort of model that you're talking about, where a small sachet of something, which hopefully is not a single-use sachet, is then put into a bigger bottle. What they're resistant, because you're seeing quite a lot of brands on Tesco shelves and things that are those, I can't think of any of the names of the brands at the minute, but there's quite a few brands that are some sort of concentrate being put into a bigger bottle. Most of them are not sold by the big brands, and the big brands have primacy on supermarket shelf space. So there's a whole kind of incumbency position that any startup brand has got to tackle. Wild have done that very well, but then also been acquired by Unilever. So there's a fairly sort of standard pattern of that. What retailers are anti is dispense in store. Whether it's dry goods dispense, which they, if I'm totally honest, they don't really care about those products because they don't make a huge amount of money. They're not the sort of uber processed products that make lots of money. They don't want customers having to, it's called dwell time. So they don't want them having to dwell for a long time in front of shelf space. They literally want people to pick things up and walk off. Dispensing is difficult for lots of products, so I would never advise dispensing milk because of all the complexity of a store having to manage the hygiene and product freshness of it. I don't think fizzy drinks should be dispensed because you're never going to keep them fizzy. I mean, I'm not saying that I'm particularly a fan of fizzy drinks, but there's loads of problems with products. So what supermarkets are anti is dispense in store. I don't think they're anti-concentrates. However, as a collective sector, they are just finding any move into reuse really, really challenging because it's the cost of change. The entire supply chain is set up to be one way, and we've got to create some sort of rationale that it makes financial sense for them to set up systems where they take things back, because that requires a huge amount of unpicking and change within the supply chain. So that's, I guess, partly why we wanted to create that evidence base, because we've got to start showing why it is more commercially advantageous for the right products. So our research showed that there's 18 priority products and about 30 priority reuse formats that could deliver this 30%. So we need to start showing that. And then I think the key driver is going to be this addition of EPR fees, because before then it was just additional cost to business because the two things were equal. Now single use is this much more expensive. So if you bring reuse in here, then you're actually saving the money. And the thing that all packaging leads within supermarkets are being charged with at the minute is, how will you save us money on your EPR fees? The challenge that sits at the heart of EPR is that it's done on weight. So currently glass is a lot more expensive. So a lot of those retailers could slash their EPR bills tomorrow by turning things that are currently in glass into sachets. Now, a lot of them simply won't do it because they know that sachets are unrecyclable, and it would be an absolute unmitigated disaster to move all of these things into pouches and sachets that are completely unrecyclable. But that is a unintended consequence of how EPR has been designed to be weight-based instead of unit-based. So it's not like EPR is the complete solution at the minute, but it is certainly adding a cost driver in towards reuse.
Yeah, just as short throw, I did make it clear that the super concentrates were delivered in drums. So you could
Okay. Yeah, I mean, listen, I'm a massive fan of it. I've done more dispensing in my life than any other type of product. Our research shows that if you absolutely want to save the most amount of money, you put the right products in refill in store, because there are some products that the reusable will never stack up commercially. So things that are in very thin film, like packets of biscuits and things, there isn't really a returnables solution that would ever compete economically with the single use. So for some products, refill in store really is your best solution. And what our Aldi project showed us, that even with very little marketing, because it was only in 2 stores, we immediately had a 30%-ish reuse rate. So I think that there are at least 30% of the population that is just got latent demand for reuse and will just come out and do it, even in stores like Aldi that aren't necessarily premium eco, those kind of stores. So yeah, I mean, this is what we do, is we just keep trying to put the evidence out there and shifting. But I do think we're going to need a regulatory change to create more of a driver towards reuse, because trying to expect everyone to change things voluntarily when it's difficult and will cost money to invest to get to a better place is fairly difficult in the capitalist society we live in.
Yeah, I just very briefly, I said, yes, glass has been hit very heavily under APR, but they're not being included in DRS, so the glass industry will have to say pay the cost within APR. And now we have an unintended consequence of maybe shifts where glass because of APR fees, but maybe incentivize sales in glass into beverages because there is no DRS.
I'm sorry, you're cracking up a bit, so I couldn't really hear you. My big beef with DRS is that it's single-use based, and there is no pathway to make it reuse based. So Wales are consulting at the minute on whether the reuse should be included in their DRS. So there is a live consultation, which I'll try and find the link to. So if anybody wants to submit anything to that consultation to support the inclusion of reuse, it's very helpful. But I think the estimated DRS infrastructure equipment bill is something like 1.2 billion. And my point is if you're going to spend 1.2 billion on reverse vending machines that can accept single use, you might as well spend some money on reverse vending machines that can actually accept reuse as well. But they're completely different machines because they have to have what's called a soft drop function so that the bottle goes in and doesn't get smashed. And that is just it's just a completely different purchase and a more expensive purchase. So at the minute we are, I think, slightly losing the battle on a DRS that includes reuse for England and Scotland, but Wales are still interested in it.
Thank you for your question, Adrian, and also your thorough response to those, Catherine. Any other questions online or no? I think we'll have to move on now. Okay, awesome. Thank you very much to our guest speakers who just kind of streamed in online and for the questions as well that we've had in the room as well. Thanks, folks.